So, Polish is England's second language. Interesting, I know. So let's discover why.
The most popular language in England is, unsurprisingly, English. Things get a lot more linguistically interesting, however, when we look into the tongue that takes silver in this home nation of the United States.
So I do find this quite interesting because obviously the rhetoric that you get is, the second language will be Pakistani and Bangladeshi and Indian and, all these different countries in that region, in the Asian region. And it's just not as bad as it's made out to be. It is mostly rhetoric. And apparently, the Polish is the second language in England.
United Kingdom. You may expect England's second most spoken language to maybe be something native to the island, like Welsh, Scottish Gaelic, Scots, or even Cornish. Yet this isn't the case at all.
Barely any Welsh
The second most widely spoken language in England is instead a tongue which has its origins in Central Europe. Polish. With somewhere between 600,000 to 700,000 speakers, Polish is by and far the second most spoken language of England. This is just England, bear in mind, not the entire UK. If we judge the entire UK, including the three other nations that compose it of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, then it becomes the fourth most spoken, and Welsh and Scots wedge themselves between Polish and English. What this does mean, however, is that within England and the entire United Kingdom, Polish is the most widely spoken non-native language in the country. Other foreign tongues spoken in large numbers in the UK include the likes of Romanian, Punjabi, Urdu and Portuguese, but none of these come close to the number of speakers Polish has in the country.
So that's straight away interesting as well. I said about maybe, those Asian languages, but that's not really true. Portuguese, well, I don't know why Portuguese people would come here. I prefer their weather. Romanian makes sense, similar to Polish, but by far and large, Polish is the biggest, second language in the UK, in England.
What makes Polish's ascent as England's second tongue even more remarkable is the fact that it attained this title relatively quickly. It only took a couple decades for Polish to become a niche language in England to its second most spoken, and those couple decades happened fairly recently too. I'm sure many people in the UK will remember the arrival of Polish in England, as the majority of the language's migration took place over the 2000s and 2010s,
Wow.
and
That is
judging
very
from
recent.
my analytics, most of you were probably alive and conscious during this time period. I myself was alive during this period too, and in the 2000s I was a kid going through the UK schooling system. I remember things starting to change around the middle of this decade. All of a sudden new kids started turning up at school, kids who didn't speak English but instead the Slavic tongue of Polish. Adult speakers of this language could be found too in town and as neighbours. Shops that lay dormant on the high street were all of a sudden springing into life and being turned into Eastern European / Polish supermarkets, selling all kinds of exotic goods my child mind had never heard of before. It happened really quickly, and as a child, I and many other kids didn't really know the context behind it, and it was never really explained to us why this was happening.
Before I started really exploring Poland, obviously I went first of all in 2012, but on this channel before exploring, I have noticed, because obviously my other job is I'm a children's football coach, and I notice the amount of Polish children that I teach. Like on Mondays, I've got 4 classes, and I think I've probably got about 5 or 6. On Friday, I've got at least 4. So they are, I notice it in my daily work life, how many children. And obviously, so if the children didn't come across originally, the parents obviously gave birth over here. That's just an interesting kind of thought that it has been getting a lot more in recent years.
It's only now I'm older and enough time has passed that I can look into this phenomena as an adult and as a historical event. And it seems that one singular event in the 2000s really kicked off this mass migration of Poles to England, with that being something that happened in 2004. For context, I was like 9 or 10 in 2004. I wasn't paying all that much attention to the geopolitical situation of Europe. I was probably watching SpongeBob or drawing Sonic OCs at the time or something. And obviously the Polish language didn't go from non-existent in England to omnipresent in one fell swoop in 2004. It happened over time, and of course Polish existed in the UK prior to this year too. Polish is unsurprisingly a product of Poland, the Central European nation nestled between Germany and Belarus. It's part of the Indo-European language family and sits on the Slavic branch, one of the three key branches of Europe along with Romance and Germanic. Yet the Slavic branch breaks down even further, with Polish being more correctly a West Slavic language, along with the likes of Czech and Slovak. Other Slavic languages like Ukrainian and Bulgarian can be found in the East Slavic and South Slavic branches respectively. All of these languages would have emerged from some kind of Proto-Slavic language. The speakers of this hypothetical tongue would have split up to different parts of the land, and from there their languages would have mutated. The earliest form of a unique Polish language, simply dubbed Old Polish, came into being in the 10th century. This ties in nicely with the founding of the Kingdom of Poland, which was established in 1025. This is one of the earliest forms of a singular Polish land, and its borders are somewhat similar to the borders of modern Poland too.
Is it?
This kingdom also set Poland down a very unique path from a religious perspective too. The kingdom had Catholicism as their religion of choice. This broke away from other Slavic powers, who while were also Christian, chose the more Slavic Orthodox denomination of the religion. Catholicism was and is way more linked with the Romance-speaking world, the grandparent of the Romance branch, Latin being more or less the official tongue of the religion. The reason I highlight all of this is because having Catholicism as the key religion of Poland would go on to have a huge effect on the language there, as Polish borrows a huge amount of words from Latin.
That makes sense in terms of the language, that it's linking with the Roman side of things and the Catholicism rather than the Orthodox. And there is then that divide that Polish go this way and then the other Slavics go the other way. So that does make sense, all linked to the religion that they adopted.
The language of Catholicism, more so than any other Slavic tongue. This makes it somewhat similar to English in a way, as that language too has a strong Latin influence. Poland in its many forms would stay Catholic, even to this day being one of the most Christian countries in the world, and Old Polish would eventually become the modern language of Polish too. During this time, Poles found their way to Britain. We of course have evidence of Polish people living in the UK/England/Britain/whatever you want to call it prior to 2004. But in most cases, these were small groups or individuals who didn't alter the wider language of the land. Evidence of Poles in England goes as far back as the 16th and 17th century. Here, Polish traders and merchants lived in the UK trying to peddle their goods. Religious expats also found their way to the island as well. This was in the aftermath of the Protestant Reformations and Henry VIII's creation of the Church of England. Protestants in devoutly Catholic Poland wanted somewhere to worship their denomination in peace, and England offered that to them. The 19th and 20th century too saw more groups of Poles arrive in England. This was due to events taking place in their own nation, such as uprisings, and of course, the two world wars which swept over much of Europe and had a huge impact on Poland.
But the only thing with the wars is I know that plenty of Poles ended up in the UK. After the war, lots of Poles, for example, went to the Commonwealth countries such as Australia, Canada, United States, obviously Great Britain as well. During the war, though, I don't know how easy it was to get across. So I get it, but how easy was it to get through Germany? Or maybe they had to take the Baltic Sea and get via that way. I want to know about 2004. What happened in 2004? But if you think of England and Great Britain or whatnot, we're a country of immigrants. We are a country of immigrants because that's what's happened with the island over the years. We've had people invading, the Vikings, the French, all of those. And so our country is a real mishmash, and it's brilliant.
These kinds of migrations did happen, but none of them were big enough to completely shift the language of England. This finally brings us back to the 21st century and that year of 2004. This was a big year in world history. It saw the release of Shrek 2 and GTA San Andreas.
It's 2004 when Poland joined the EU. I think it is. And then the freedom of movement, which is brilliant.
Yet it was also in this year that the nation of Poland finally joined the European Union. The European Union, known more commonly as the EU for short, is probably something you've heard of. As the name implies, it is a union of European nations that share common interests, laws, and economic policies. One of the big features of the EU is the freedom of movement those within it benefit from. EU citizens can travel to, live in, and work within other European nations as if they were simply moving to another part of their own country. It also makes airport queues way easier. For example, someone from Germany, an EU nation, could simply go live and work in another EU nation like France or Italy or Spain with little to no red tape. It's understandable as to why joining the EU was such a big deal to Poland in 2004.
See, I still believe that freedom of movement is brilliant. Think of all the retired pensioners in England, or the fact that you get plenty of people that move to Spain, Portugal, these hot countries to live their kind of lives, either that's in retirement or to try and find a better life in the sun. So I've got no issue with it at all. And obviously, I assume what it meant then was for Poles, because of the economic situation, they were able to come to the UK or England and actually work to earn money to either send back or, once again, to find a better life. So I have no problem with freedom of movement. I think it's brilliant. As long as the governments of the country do the right job and do it sensibly and manage it well, that our Tories did not do, then I have no problem.
As it opened up so much more of the world to them, Poles ended up migrating all across the EU after this moment, setting up lives in multiple countries. A large portion of Poles, however, set their sights on an island nation way out west, which was also part of the EU. Well, at the time anyway. We'll get to that.
We'll reverse it soon,
Living
hopefully.
in the UK, and England in particular, had a lot of benefits in the eyes of many Polish people, and multiple factors led to Polish speakers arriving here. A key factor was money. In 2004, Poland's economy was not in a good spot. Unemployment was high and wages were low. This meant that those who could get work weren't earning all that much. In the UK, meanwhile, there were jobs aplenty in 2004, and wages were 4 times higher than those in Poland. For those in Poland struggling financially, moving to England felt like a no-brainer. The UK was also way more accommodating to the new Polish arrivals at the time too. It was just one of the few EU nations that allowed Poles into their country immediately in 2004. Most other countries put temporary restrictions in place which delayed their arrival. This made the UK even more inviting for those in Poland wanting to move across the continent. Also, moving for a better quality of life has long been a part of Polish identity. Many Poles in the past would move to countries like Germany for work. And of course, in the 19th century, a huge influx of Poles found themselves in the halls of Ellis Island, looking to start a new life in the land of the free. Migration is seen as being in the bones of many Poles. Also, by 2004, Poland had only relatively recently come out of an extended period of communist rule. Poland was part of the communist Eastern Bloc, starting in the mid-20th century. Migrating to other parts of the Eastern Bloc proved difficult, and moving outside of it was practically impossible at the time. Communism fell in Poland in 1989, meaning by 2004, Poland had only been free of this rule for 15 years or so.
I think that's a really interesting point as well, isn't it? That I know it was just over 10 years, but it's that freedom all of a sudden to go and explore the world. You know, obviously recently being in Katowice and speaking to Poles that were in the Eastern Bloc and they were part of that, they didn't have anything good necessarily to think about the rest of the world. It's us versus the West. But actually, as media started coming through and Poles then all of a sudden saw a different world. And I think that makes it enticing. So you can understand why they would want to experience it and, say, come to England. Makes complete sense.
Many in the nation will have strong memories of this time when movement was more or less impossible. So you can imagine they craved to explore and settle the wider world. All of this is the backdrop for what was actually going on in 2004 and the wider 2000s in the UK, while 10-year-old Patrick was still trying to figure out how to lock Mewtwo in Super Smash Bros. Melee or something. Yet, I imagine this wasn't really explained to most kids, so we just saw Polish people in shops and words pop up in school and in town with little to no explanation. In reality, many of those coming over were single members of families, arriving here to work and sending their earnings back home so their family could have a better life in Poland. It takes an awful lot of courage to leave your home behind, and even more to leave your home and family. The influx of Polish people in the UK was seen by many as a bad thing. People coming over and taking
our
jobs,
jobs,
that old
yeah.
chestnut. They were seen as putting a strain on things like schools and housing, and many presumed they would cause antisocial behaviour.
We all know, though, it's nonsense. This whole rhetoric, once again, and it's not just Poles coming to England, it's Romanians, all these people, Bangladeshis and all this nonsense, and all these other countries have the same issue that have migrants coming. It's, they're taking our jobs. What? The jobs that you lazy people don't want to do. That's what it is, because these Poles would come across and be cleaners and things like that, which, white English people are too belligerent to want to do because it's easier to live off benefits. So it's a nonsense rhetoric, and it's that rhetoric that is just spread, and then people believe it.
Others, meanwhile, saw their arrival as a great introduction of a new culture in the UK, with many Poles filling work roles that were going unfilled by British people. Plus, the work they did generated a huge amount of money for the country too. In the 20 years or so that have passed since 2004, it is thought that around 1 million Polish people have come to live in the UK and England. It's been this 20-year period which saw a huge rise in the Polish language here, and saw it become England's second tongue. It's a remarkably quick rise for a language to gain prominence. Yet, just as quickly as Polish arrived in England, it may disappear, as in 2016, just 12 years
Brexit,
after Poland joined the EU, a majority of people in the UK voted to leave the EU. This caused all kinds of nonsense in the UK and the wider world. Hello long queues at airport passport control. I just love having to wait in you for so long now and watching other people go past really quickly in the EU line. I absolutely adore that. Cheers, lads. But of course, this had a huge effect on not only Brits looking to live and work in other parts of the EU, but also EU citizens living in the UK, like the Polish. That freedom of movement they benefited from was now gone. And so
Exactly, right? It's not even, Brexit wasn't even just about, people from other countries coming and living in the UK. It was about people from the UK going to live in other parts of the world, in Europe, should I say. Now, we can't do it either. So all that Brexit has done is restricted us as well as others. It's madness. It's made tariffs harder, more paperwork, queuing in lines, getting visas. It's madness. And it does need to be, we do need to reverse it, to be honest. We need to get back into the EU. Even Alan Sugar the other day says that it's one of the biggest mistakes that Britain's made. So it's a disaster. I know I'll get comments on here like, EU's bad. Yeah, well, you try now being out of it and seeing how bad it is.
So were many other benefits. To many Poles, this has made living in England far less of a no-brainer as it was back in 2004. Many have left the country, with one source stating that around a quarter of the Poles living in the UK have since left.
Such a
Hence
shame.
why that initial number of 1 million has dropped to around 700,000 or so. Yet, that is still a huge amount of people, and more than enough to securely cement Polish as England's second tongue. And those who have stuck around celebrate their Polish heritage, with more and more Polish festivals and events taking place across the country.
I love it. I love it. I'm so glad because I love Polish food. I love going into Polish shops and just stocking up, getting a pączki. Oh, yes. It is such a shame. You can perfectly understand why Poles moved here, why it's the second language. It could have almost been those other countries such as Romania but as it says, as soon as Poland became a part of the EU, it just made Poles want to come here for a better life, to send money back. And it makes complete sense why Polish is England's second language for sure. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I hope you enjoyed the video. Debates in the comments are fine. Just don't be ignorant. That's all. Don't be so ignorant. Don't chuck out random rhetoric either. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and as always, I'll catch you next time.